Welcome to Mex Moves, our weekly podcast on Mexico business and finance of interest to the global audience. How are you, Eduardo?
Doing well, Damien. How are you?
Well, so this week we have two great interviews, one with Fernando Sandoval, co-founder and CFO from Kapital, with a K, the SME bank that just raised $86 million at a reported valuation of $1.3 billion after acquiring most of Intercam's assets. And we also have a great interview with Alejandra Palacios, the former president of the COFECE, Mexico's competition commission. And she's going to talk about the new competition law and framework in Mexico, which may be better than skeptics originally feared. Although it remains to be seen who's going to make up the board of the new competition commission. So that's what we have. And what I thought we'd kick off talking about possible soft drink taxes.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very important news that came out earlier this week, and that will have probably repercussions on some of the mostly traded companies on the Mexican stock exchange. Don't you think, Damien?
Yeah, well, already Arca Continental is down, I think, about 5 percentage points relative to the index, and Coca-Cola FEMSA, these are the two big bottles here, also down 4 or 5 points versus the index. So they've been underperformers. I think the news started to filter out in late August. President Sheinbaum, in her Mañanera, talked about a national campaign against soft drink consumption, and that started to kind of raise fears that some tax hikes might be coming. And then the president's legal advisor, Godoy, also talked about a possible, specifically in her case, a possible tax hike on soft drinks. And I think there's probably two factors at play here. One is the government needs more money to finance its, above all, its social programs, its pensions, and the stipends for the students, which sort of consuming more money as time goes on, as people get older. And this would obviously be potentially at least an interesting source of revenue, assuming that demand for soft drinks is fairly inelastic. And second, obesity, right? Mexico, as we all know, has a very overweight population, even compared to the US. So according to some numbers I was looking up, about 73% of adults in Mexico are overweight, and 37% are considered obese, with children also about 36% are considered obese, and so on. And related to that, or arguably related to that, Mexicans drink an awful lot of soft drinks. So 166 liters per person per year, which is a bit difficult to kind of grasp. But I read that 7 in 10 Mexican children have a soda every day, most often at breakfast, which is quite a shocking thought, having a sugary soda at breakfast every day. You know, according to this line of reasoning, a soft drink tax could both raise revenues and maybe, by making soft drinks more expensive, curb their consumption. Now, Mexico already has a soft drink tax. It was introduced back in January 2014. So it was one of the kind of pioneers in this. It was 1 peso per liter on sugary drinks, which was about a 10% price increase at the time. And there was also, in addition to that, an 8% sales tax on high calorie, non-essential foods, basically foods with more than, I think, 275 calories per 100 grams. Now, even though that tax has been going up, it's now 1 peso 64 per liter due to inflation. It was linked to inflation. Soft drink prices have been going up by more than inflation. So what was originally a sort of 10% impact on prices is probably now nearer a sort of 7%. So there's some argument that that could be adjusted to catch up with the increase in soft drinks. Now the government has to present a budget, I think, on September the 8th, and we'll get some idea of the details, and then as we've seen in the past, there'll be fierce lobbying from especially from the bottlers if this is confirmed, to try and either scrap it or at least cut it back, whatever it finally is going to be. So we won't know for a couple of months what the final outcome is. If the tax is on volume rather than on the sales value, this actually, although it's bad for the whole sector, probably plays to the Coca-Cola bottlers' advantages, because proportionate to their sales price, they'd be paying less of a tax than the cheaper soft drink companies like Big Cola and Pepsi would be paying a higher tax on their sales price if it's a tax on volume. So it's not just what the tax is, but how it's levied, whether it's on volume, which the premium kind of Coca-Cola bottlers would prefer if there is going to be a tax, or if it's going to be on the sales value or some mix on that. What's your take, Eduardo?
Yeah, I think you nailed it, Damien. I think the two elements that are behind this move is first the need to raise more revenue, and second, I think there is a real concern on the obesity problem the country faces and the cost that is generating to the health system in terms of diabetes and all these problems that come along with that disease or that problem. Now, I don't think in the past the tax reduced consumption, as you said. Also, it's quite inelastic. So I wonder whether this will have any impact on that end and stop Mexicans from drinking sugary drinks. It's I think up in the air. It's part of the diet sometimes in some quarters. People, especially construction workers, need their Coca-Cola to get the energy to continue working. I don't know, but the goal of trying to reduce consumption from a health perspective is not bad. I wonder whether they would have used those additional tax revenue that they would get to directly help those that face diabetes and all the other problems. I don't think it's earmarked for that specifically, but it's an interesting effort on the part of the government from a health perspective. I don't know if it does what it aims to do. And on the other hand, it will raise revenue. We drink a lot of soft drinks in this country. And it will help on that end for the government's finances, which are pressured not only by the social programs we had in place, but by the new ones that Sheinbaum has even installed during his first year in office.
That's right. It would be a break from AMLO. Basically, the existing taxes came in, before he was president, and he didn't touch this in any meaningful way, on the grounds that these taxes would, fall mainly on the poorer segments of Mexico that drink a lot of soft drinks, and soft drinks relative to their incomes is a much bigger part of their overall expenditure. So it would hit his political base. So he didn't touch this. So this would be kind of Sheinbaum moving away to a more sort of technocratic, if you want, stance on taxation, and would mark a difference. There's quite a story in The Economist about sin taxes in Europe, which have been hugely successful historically, on cigarettes, alcohol, sugary drinks, and petrol, of course, raising hundreds of billions of euros. But they've now become, apparently, according to the story, way too successful. Consumption of alcohol is down. Consumption of cigarettes obviously is way down. And now with electric vehicles, taking off so much, the taxes from petrol are also declining. So we've seen a decline, apparently, of sin taxes as a percentage of GDP down by about 20%. So they're sort of, almost from a fiscal point of view, they're very becoming too successful. They're not raising the revenues that they historically have raised, as people do actually react to the taxes, or maybe for other reasons they're not smoking and drinking and driving gasoline cars so much.
Yeah, I mean that has not been the case yet in Mexico, although in terms of the sugary drinks, I think, but. Maybe with a new level of a taxation, they will stop purchasing Coca-Cola and all these sugar drinks that are available in the market. We have to wait and see.
So talking, Eduardo, about electric vehicles, EVs, Vemo just raised a huge amount of money, $250 million in equity from Vision Ridge Partners, a U.S. private equity firm. Vemo is a mobility startup founded back in 2021 with the backing of Riverstone. And it's basically building an integrated platform that combines its leasing of EVs, infrastructure for EV charging, fleets, its own drivers, and proprietary technology. And they're the largest, as I understand it, EV operator in Mexico at this point. They're a partner to Uber and Didi. If you get into a Venmo, if you get into an Uber or Didi and it's electric car, it's overwhelmingly likely to be a Venmo. Have you ever used any of their cars?
I have. I mean, I've ordered an Uber or a Didi, and eventually a BMO vehicle comes and picks me up. And I mean, it's an electric car. Yeah, it's quite nice in that sense. It's the same price. I didn't see any difference on that end, and I think they want to use this money to expand their operations to Guadalajara and Monterrey, or maybe they're already there, but increase their presence in those two markets. I guess it's the trend that we've spoken about a few times, Damien. That despite some of the rhetoric in the U.S. against some of these electric vehicles or electric renewable energy, the market seems to be looking to use this new technology, and maybe there is a bump in the road currently, but in the long term, they will be very much in demand as people are more and more conscious about the climate problems that we're facing. So, good for them. A lot of money. I don't remember a startup raising that kind of. I mean, there should be, there have been, but $250 million is not. It's not pocket money.
That's right. I hope we're going to get Vimo on the show next week to explain a bit more detail this. And I also expect we'll have Didi on the show next week. So next week will be a sort of urban mobility episode of our podcast if all goes according to plan. And while you were moving on, you were looking at the BIVA Investor Day in New York and the Mexico Investor Week in New York, organized by BIVA. What did you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it last week that this was going to be a big day for the Mexican markets with this BIVA Day in New York. It seems like it was a success. I mean, high officials were there. Marcelo Ebrard was there. Jonathan Heath, a governor of Mexico's central bank, was there. Edgar Amador, the finance minister, sent a video. And it seems like there was interest. I mean, the foreign direct investment numbers in Mexico are still rising, not on new investment, but companies are reinvesting their profits in the country, which is not a bad sign at all. We also got some news that Bloomberg reported on the potential entry of a new regulation for hedge funds to operate in Mexico. Maria Risa, the head of the BIVA stock exchange, was very optimistic that with the new Undersecretary of Finance, things will speed up, that we will have that regulatory framework ready, and that we could have more of these hedge funds investing in Mexico, which would be probably good for the markets. And so I think overall it's good that Mexico is trying to promote itself more abroad. That's also a little bit of a break from Andres Manuel. The current president seems to be on more friendly terms with the business community, despite the fact that in Mexico, companies are not investing yet as much as they probably could. But I think it's a good sign, no? What do you make?
Yeah, no, I think there were hundreds of investors there, both U.S. and Mexican investors, and clearly there's interest. The stock market's done very well this year; it's outperformed the U.S. So I think usually when the stock market goes up, there's you get the IPOs coming subsequently.
Well, we hope they do that. That's the only element. That's the piece of the puzzle that is still missing, and we hope they can do something about it so that there will be more names and attract more people to the Mexican markets. Also, the head of NAFIN was up there in New York as well. Our friend Jose Antonio Aguilar chair a panel and talk to him. So I think there was a good effort from everyone to try to promote Mexico.
And abroad was there, as you mentioned, and Mexico, and we've also, as we've talked about in previous episodes, Mexico kind of gradually seems to be sort of aligning its trade policy with respect to third countries with the US, especially with respect to China. And Mexico announced, related to that, anti-dumping duties between about 54 cents and up to $22.50 on Chinese shoes that come into Mexico under $22.58. So that's going to be it's going to make, presumably it's going to make shoes more expensive for Mexicans by putting these anti-dumping duties. On the other hand, it's going to help the Mexican shoe industry, in León, in Guanajuato, and other places which have suffered. I think Mexico, which used to be a very self-sufficient in shoes, now imports about 75% of the shoes from Asia. A lot of it's moved from China to other Asian countries. So we'll see what happens with respect to shoe imports from other Asian countries, which will now have this advantage against China. But this will help curb the deficit with China, presumably, along with all the other things they're doing in Mexico. And there's sort of more signs that Mexico is kind of following the US line on curbing Chinese imports at the expense of Mexican consumers, and obviously to the benefit of Mexican producers, to the extent that they're competing with the Chinese, even if other Asian countries may just pick up the slack, and it may not actually help the Mexican producers that much.
Yeah. The shoe industry has complained about unfair practices by the Chinese for quite a long time. They've lost market share. It's interesting. This comes as also Mexico has levied taxes on textiles, and now, as we talked last week, they are thinking of putting even more of these levies on other goods that come from China. We'll have to wait. Yeah, we'll have to wait and see the impact. I think as long as they do it according to the legal framework that the OMCD, who nobody talks about it anymore because it seems to be completely irrelevant. But as long as, if people are abusing practices, subsidizing goods, I think there is a case to defend your industry one way or the other. And I think in the case of Chinese products, Mexico and the world has been too lenient in letting them in without a good revision of how they produce their goods and whether they get government help. That is unfair on free trade terms.
And Eduardo, did you see the story in Bloomberg on Pemex and the fracking, non-fracking debate by Scott Squires, your old shop?
I haven't. Apparently, it came out today, right, Damien? There was some little talk of that Mexico would get into that, but they're not using the word fracking because it's kind of like an evil word in the Cuatro T parlor, but they seem to be finding ways to allow this new technology to take place in Mexico. Is that what the story says?
That's right. They're calling it, instead of fracking, in English at least, stimulation of complex geological deposits. I think fracking is a lot easier to get your mouth around. But Mexico has a lot of shale gas reserves, 545 trillion cubic feet, which puts it the sixth largest globally. It's basically the same or very similar to the reserves on the US side. The article sort of says that the US shale gas is eventually is maturing and eventually going to be declining, and Mexico would be a good place to invest to replace that. And Mexico, as we all know, is investing a lot of gas from the US, which has raised concerns about its sovereignty. The US being able to kind of cut off gas to Mexico should there be a difference between the two countries. Now, I think it's a lot needs to happen before Mexico becomes a significant gas producer, and there are also some quite potentially negative consequences, leaving aside the environmental issue, which is what has held back fracking up to now. First of all, Pemex itself is only investing like $600 million in these fracking projects, according to their budget, which is 3% of their operating budget, and that's actually down. So Pemex doesn't have the money to do this. Secondly, Pemex doesn't obviously have the know-how, and international partners, having not been paid by Pemex over the last 6 or 7 years, and not being able to easily invest risk capital in Mexico, probably going to be quite reluctant to put money in, as we've seen. So there isn't a lot of know-how. And then the third point, which doesn't perhaps get as much attention, is that right now Mexico is importing from the US a lot of this gas, most of its gas, almost all of its gas, and it's very, very cheap, because basically gas is a byproduct of the oil, and so if they don't give it to Mexico, they in some cases have to get rid of it or burn it. So the Mexico imports of gas are very, very cost competitive, and Mexico, for the most part, has very decent pipelines to import this gas at a reasonable price. So if Mexico started producing its own gas without these advantages that you have in the US and without the installed base in the US, the cost of gas would be much higher. And that would either mean higher electricity bills, which no one wants to pay, or still more sort of cost pressure on CFE. So I think it's in everyone's interest that the current sort of status quo remain, which is Mexico gets this gas, which otherwise would struggle to find a market in the US, and makes CFE much more competitive. And it turns out to be a very good market for the US. And frankly, in my no doubt neoliberal perspective, the US doesn't need natural gas as a lever over Mexico. The US has a million other things it can do to Mexico if it so wishes. And actually, natural gas is probably the worst sort of leverage over Mexico, because it's one of the things that clearly benefits big US oil companies, big US gas companies, big US energy infrastructure companies, which have Trump's ear. And Trump, as far as I can recall, has never mentioned gas as a leverage over Mexico. So I think, as we've seen with the sort of semi kind of closing of Intercam and CEI and so on, Mexico and Victor, and then the tariffs, the US could do many other things to hurt Mexico, which would have very little direct impact on the US. And gas is probably something that they wouldn't want to go down. But let's hope Mexico does do that. All said, let's hope that Mexico does invest in this, even if they're not allowed in this stimulation of complex geological deposits, as Bloomberg called it, because it would be good for Mexico to be able to produce the gas and of course the oil at the same time that would come from this investment. And let's hope that they that they develop a investment framework that makes it attractive for foreigners to put their capital in, working with Pemex under the current rules, so that the national oil company starts to revert the decline in production that it's suffered from.
Yeah, I think the fact of the matter is that there are environmental issues, no doubt about it, that every country should look into it. But I think, like you said, if they open this potentially new way of producing gas in Mexico and they do it in a market-oriented framework, then maybe some companies, I don't think Pemex has the resources, not the energy, nor the capacity to look into it with so many other problems that it's still facing. So if they allow others to do it and they find that these projects are feasible, then it would be great, because then you start developing an industry that is not there, but it has to be on a market-oriented basis and not just because of sovereignty or any of all these big words that actually they do make sense. But like you said, if the U.S. wants to hurt us, wants to hurt Mexico, we just saw it with a very 1,000-word communique about the banking industry that they can do. So if it opens the door for a new energy source for the Mexican economy, I think it's welcome news. We have to wait and see who puts the money where their mouth is, especially when the U.S. gas is so cheap. It's going to be hard to compete against them.
And Eduardo, just before we move to the interview with Fernando Sandoval, CFO and co-founder of Kapital, after the interview, I was able to look a bit more closely at some of the numbers. And just to correct or to complement what I say in the interview, in the 6 months, not to June, Kapital with a K made according to the CNBV figures, made 146 million pesos, not in June itself. But the fact is, over that 6-month period, they were profitable, and they were actually profitable in every month, according to the CNBV data, and that makes them different to other fintechs. Now, one of the reasons they're different is that they're not a kind of classic fintech in the sense that they also have branches. They bought Altofin, the bank that was focused on car loans. They cleaned up that portfolio, and presumably the cleaned up portfolio plus new lending that they've done is what's driven this, because back in 2024, over the 12-month period, they lost about $130 million. Now, the book value, slightly less than $100 million of the regulated entity. And then they've just, as we'll talk about in the interview, raised another $100 million. So that would give a book value of maybe $200 million, assuming this additional capital goes into book value. So that would put the valuation, this reported $1.3 billion, would put the valuation about six and a half times book. But that might be different to that in the sense that I would assume that the new investors would go into a holding company above Kapital, which has assets outside the regulated entity. They also have a big financial entity in Colombia. So we don't have the data of the whole kind of non-regulated entity. We only have the data on the regulated entity, and it may well be that there's more capital above the financial group. Anyway, it's very welcome that they've raised this money. It's, I think, one of the first since the heydays of 2021, when there was a sort of boom in fintechs. It's one of the first new investments in the financial sector that's come at a significant appreciation to the previous valuation. And stick around for the interview, because Fernando goes into some more details on how the company is doing and why they bought Intercam's assets and what the opportunities are in lending to Mexico's SMEs, with help from AI and some machine learning on the data analysis that they have.
Yeah, but why don't we move on and listen to the new kid on Mexico's financial blog? Although they're not that new, but they're not that kid, but they are the newsmakers of the last few days.
Today, we're joined by Fernando Sandoval. Fernando has overseen Kapital's evolution from a fintech startup into a fully regulated challenger bank, and now into Kapital Grupo Financiero with the acquisition of most of Intercam's assets. How are you, Fernando?
Everything great, Damon. Thanks for the invite.
Pleasure. So first, Fernando, congrats on this week's equity raise. I think you raised $86 million, valuing Kapital at $1.3 billion, making you a unicorn. You raised the money from Tribe Capital and Pelian Venture Partners. Maybe, Fernando, we can kick off with just some details on the transaction, how it's related to the recent purchase of most of Intercam's assets.
Yeah. Totally. The actual Series C amount, the final amount is $100 million around, and the valuation is 1.35. So excited about the news,
Brilliant. And was this a condition from the regulators from buying the Intercam assets to put more equity into the financial group? How did these two events come about, the Intercam and and the equity raise?
No, to be honest, we already had the equity on hand, and it's like from investors that we actually already know. Like the Intercam deal happened as an opportunity, like as you know, like the Mexican financial industry changed a lot and really fast about that stuff. And we actually find a way to support the financial industry, help Intercam, and actually also enhance the value proposition at Kapital.
So quite a lot of the fintechs, like Nu, Klar, Revolut, Plata, have gone mostly greenfield in Mexico, building their operations from scratch. You, with the purchase of Altofin and now a lot of the Intercam assets, have gone, at least to some extent, through acquisitions. Why do you think the acquisition route is a better one than a greenfield route for Kapital?
As you know, on the fintech space, startup space, tech world we are in, everything is about growth and everything is about time to market to keep generating more value proposition to your customers and the market you're focusing. So since day one, since the day we started, we knew that if we want to implement a B2B neobank, we needed to be a regulated entity. Because even though a lot of fintechs, they usually are fighting against legacy players, there's a really important thing to understand here. You are operating in a regulated game. So the faster you abide regulation, the faster regulation can push you forward. And also in the B2B space, how we see things is everything is about trust. And like maybe you can start as a BIVA or as a FIFO or as a FOM, or there are different permits that you can start doing business. But once you actually need real scale, everything is about providing this trust, and the strongest permit is the bank, because that's how you protect the customers.
Right. Are you worried that it's going to be a challenge to integrate all these different cultures, different business models into one single company?
Well, I wouldn't define worried, but as you know, it's like and like we say in Mexico, you need to be worried. You need to be actually executing and solving problems. So, this is a challenge how we see it, and of course, the same challenge we faced when we acquired Banco Tofin. It was two different scenarios. Intercam was one of the most profitable financial groups in the financial industry with the highest ROE, and Autofin had a different condition. So, we're excited because Intercam used to focus on companies as well, and that's our value proposition, so B2B facing, and that's how we empower SMBs to grow. And with the Intercam acquisitions, we can actually complement all these products we have with more things and keep providing the complete ecosystem that is our moat.
I was looking at your numbers, Fernando, and there's been a huge turnaround in 2025. So last year, according to the numbers I have from the CNBV, you lost about 130 million pesos in December, let's say, and now you're you're making 150 million pesos back in June, 130, and in May, 100 in April. So there's been a huge improvement in your net profit, but also in your financial margin and your revenues. Basically, whatever line you look at, there's been an improvement. How have you achieved that turnaround?
Basically, since our business is based in technology, we can leverage that technology. We can reinvest way faster the profits, providing bigger margins, increasing the cash flow, and achieve profitability way faster than traditional banks. As you know, Damien, on average, all the new banks that have been operating in Mexico, on average, it took them from 3 to 4 years to reach profitability. And that's because they had a really heavy structure and everything was manual. For us, technology is the essence of the company. We're a tech company that is leveraging a bank permit to provide services, and it's not only on the front part of the business; it's also on the back office. So all this digital automation, it goes around all the departments. And as you know, the most important thing about us is as we define ourselves, we're the first data-driven neobank or the first AI neobank that operates in the region. And this is that because the business started with data. And the more we know, the more we can digitize, the more we can automate. Because instead of having a big call center, instead of having a big KYB team, instead of having a big underwriting team, we already have all this information where it creates a seamless experience end to end every time we onboard a customer. And that's how we need way less people, and we have more capacity to scale more the business way faster.
Fernando, you just mentioned AI. Could you tell us a little bit more of how are you using or implementing AI within the services that you provide to companies?
Exactly. So for us, it is not about providing financial products. Because as you know, all financial products by themselves are commodity. If you provide a credit card as a commodity, a wallet or a current account is a commodity, a loan is a commodity. You always fight on price. So when Rene, Edra, and I started the business, the big vision is how actually you can provide value to the small and medium companies. How you provide value, but actually offering the information they already have. So when we started, is how we switch. How can we actually give access to that financial information, this corporate information in real time so they can take decisions? So we get access to more than 50,000 data points, and that gives us full visibility of what is happening to the company. We know how are the real-time sales, expenses, profits, all the detail of the account receivable per customer, all the detail of accounts payable per customer, and then we power it with current accounts. So what does that mean? That means the company's cash flow. And that's how we actually help business owners, help treasurers, help CFOs to take better decisions. So that's why when we started, we switched the thesis. It is not about digitizing a financial product. It's actually first, organize them. Second, give them visibility. And with all that data, we enhance it to help you take these decisions. And that's why our vision is to become the CFO of a company and they help you take these decisions because we're giving all this information. So we're automating everything because all this data, like I told you. And how you automate? By implementing this AI on top of it.
Does that mean that with the Intercam assets that you're acquiring, you're buying scale, you're buying basically more customers to give them that service that you've already given to the ones that you've already attended before?
I think it goes both ways. Intercam was a really strong financial institution on the service, on the products they manage, etc. But they like a really important thing that is tech. On our side, we're providing all this tech to enhance all these products and enhance the operation. So I think we find benefits in both sides. And the core is that we both focus on companies.
That was crucial to, I guess, finalize the deal with Intercam. When is it closing, Fernando? Is it coming to an end really soon? What time frame can you give us?
It's already closed.
It's already closed.
We were waiting for the government approvals. We already received the government approvals. Right now, actually, like what financial group Kapital.
And so you're doing the merging as soon as you can, taking over the people, everything else is already taking place as we speak.
Exactly. You know, like everything is execution, and right now we're focusing on merging as fast as possible. And of course, like the idea is to provide right away the solutions the customer needs.
Are we going to find out how much you paid for these assets, portfolios, everything else?
I would love to mention that, but like to be honest, the former vendors always like to respect the price, to respect the deal, and like we're respecting that decision.
And on Intercam's problems that emerge from this accusation, are there any reputational risks that you might be absorbing, or what are you doing? I know that technology is your main core, so I guess that's how you will filter out any potential transactions that might be of dubious comings. Is that right? What can you tell us about that?
So Eduardo, I would answer this question into two. First of all, everything was worked alongside with the governments. So, and it was crucial for us because actually the idea for us is actually to help the financial industry and actually like find the way and to solve this, which we already did. And on the second way, like I mentioned before, everything is data. So imagine every time we onboard a customer, we get access to all this information. And once the customer start operating, we have the real-time cash flow of the customer. So we can match the electronic invoicing, we can match real-time cash flow, we can match credit bureau, like 50,000 data points, like I told you. And this is how actually we have a way stronger underwriting for credit, KYB, AML, etc. Will actually give us way more visibility of what is going on in the company. And that's one of their strongest features. Everything is about how you underwrite risk. And for us, that's our core. Like I told you, data is our core, AI is our core, and that's how we'll actually process everything to provide products to the customers and also to strengthen our analysis.
You mentioned the authorities. I guess they were very helpful to finalize this transaction. What about the U.S. authorities in that sense? Were they involved? Was there any need to involve them or not at all?
We work both sides. Yes, they have been supporting us.
Okay, and on my end, and so What's the limit, Fernando? You've reached unicorn status. You are acquiring a big chunk of assets, businesses. How far can you walk?
Well, I'm sure you know us guys, and as you said, the sky is the limit. I think for us, we love what we're doing. We love helping the SMBs actually, which no one was addressing this market. And as you know, SMBs represent from 50 to 60% of the GDP. They employ around 70 to 80% of the people in each country. So it's a big, big opportunity, not only in Mexico, not only in Latin America, but also worldwide. And the best part of it is that our solution works plug and play. So we can easily connect in different countries and start providing this solution. What's next? The business we're in is its growth, but of course, adding value. And yes, we're a unicorn, but our mindset is always also it's about generating profits, generate revenue, generate value, and that's how we think. That's our mindset.
Fernando, Tribe, Kapital, and Pelion, which are two of your VC investors, will presumably want to exit at some point. Would you like to do an IPO in the next 3 years, or is that too soon?
We're working on it. And actually, we're at the BIVA Day, we're in the Mexican Financial Week in New York, everything. I think it's really important for the Mexican market to have an exit. I think we're missing that gap. It doesn't matter which company, but also that's going to prove all the opportunity you can see in the Mexican market. So yes, that's a target. We're looking for an IPO in the near future.
Brilliant. Fernando, thank you so much for your time. Really interesting, and congratulations on the Intercam acquisition and the equity raise and being a unicorn.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much again for the time. And if you need anything else, any other question, feel free to ping me.
We're delighted to have with us today Alejandra Palacios. How are you, Alejandra?
Hi, Damien. Hi, Eduardo. Thank you very much for this invitation.
It's our pleasure. Alejandra is one of Mexico's most respected experts on competition policy and corporate governance. She currently serves as external counsel to the law firm Cuatro Casas, and she's on the board of BBVA Mexico, Alfa, Aeropuertos GAP, and Seguros Monterrey. Before this, she was the first woman to chair Mexico's Federal Economic Competition Commission, COFECE as it's called here. She's also been a professor of economics at the ITAM. She has an undergraduate degree in economics and an MBA from the ITAM, I think an MPA from the CIDE and an LLM from Berkeley in California. So impressive credentials, Alejandra. Thank you for joining us. I guess the first question, Alejandra, last year Mexico approved a new competition law, basically, as I understand it, replacing the COFECE and the IFT with the new authority, the CNA, under the Ministry of Economy. From your perspective, does this centralization and do these changes strengthen competition enforcement and policy in Mexico, or does it undermine its independence, or both?
I think a little bit of both, Damien, which is something quite interesting because, as you say, there was an constitutional reform at the end of last year. And the objective of that reform was to bring the antitrust agency within the realm of the federal government. So instead of being an autonomous agency of the federal government, now it has technical independence, although it directly depends from the executive branch. So independence could be undermined. But then on the other side, as part of this constitutional reform, there was a reform to the Competition Act, and that act makes the antitrust agency much stronger, both in terms of the sanctions they can impose, and also their investigative tools. So the agency might be stronger, and then also it will depend more of their broad view, the sectors they'll investigate, the kind of investigations they'll open. It will depend more on the executive branch agenda.
So about a year has passed, I think, a bit more than a year since the constitutional changes were first made. Since then, is your feeling that more or less optimistic on what this implies for competition and policy? Have you got a sense that they're going to appoint relatively independent members to the board of the new authority and go after companies that are not following the competition law in Mexico, or have you got a sense that they're going to use the competition authority to pursue their political goals rather than competition goals?
As you say, no, the discussion has been on and off for the past year. And it's interesting to see in particular that the antitrust agency, although it's part of the executive branch, certain features of its technical independence are still there, and they're written in the new Antitrust Act. So, for example, they disappeared, as we knew, the privacy agency, the energy regulators, the telecom regulators, and the competition regulators. And the one that has the possibility of having more independence in their everyday work in terms of the agenda they can establish, the budget they'll have, the hiring of government officials, is the antitrust agency. So I think that's an interesting feature compared to what happened to the privacy agency, the telecom agency, and the energy regulators. So, I mean, a year ago, if you were like an antitrust geek as myself, the scenario was terrible. Things have been happening in the sense that the antitrust agency still holds, and it's working, and we have to say it. Right now, we're entering, as September opens, in a very delicate moment, because this is when President Sheinbaum will choose the new board of the antitrust agency. And once she appoints the new board, then the agency will go to form part of the executive branch, and we'll see at that moment, you know, like when it exists, what is really their budget, how many people from the previous agency they brought to the new agency, and the profiles of the new commissioners. So when that happens, I'll give you an answer in terms of, is this agency going to stand and how independent it will be. But for now, compared with the other regulators in Mexico, COFECE has, I would say, it's the only one that's standing for now.
Alejandra, one of the new tools, as I understand it from the law, is that consumers or individuals can pursue class action suits against companies after a CNA resolution. Do you see that as a sort of powerful tool to curb anti-competitive behavior, or do you think it might lead to lots of sort of frivolous litigation and actually harm kind of economic incentives?
Okay, so the possibility of class actions and damage claims, in theory, has existed in the law for several years. The thing that has happened and why we haven't seen them flourish a little bit has to do because there's still complications in terms of when could you present these class actions and damage claims. So what changed in the law is not the possibility of these figures, but what it says is that once the resolution of the antitrust agency is firm, then you can present a claim. What changed is that what does firm mean? And what it means is that once the antitrust agency says there's an infringement and there's a damage, then class actions and individual damages can be presented, and you don't have to wait until that case is reviewed by the judiciary branch. So that saves you about maybe 3 to 5 years, because the judiciary review of antitrust cases could take between 3 and 5 years. That's really what's going to change. And I do believe we're going to start seeing damage claims and class actions. In the past 10 years, and just recently, COFECE presented its first class action. And it did that in a case for bid rigging at the Instituto Mexicano del Seguro Social, where certain companies had rigged the system and they had charged over prices for certain medications. And that case was solved by the agency, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years ago. And they just presented it recently because it was finally confirmed as firm in the judicial review. So this is what's going to change. And yeah, I think we're going to see more class actions and damages claims. So, Damon, I think what's interesting regarding your question is that sanctions are higher, presenting damages claims are easier. The agency has better techniques to make its investigations. So I think companies will need to be more aware of infringing the Mexico Antitrust Act. I think that what we're going to see is a new wave of antitrust compliance within the big Mexican companies, and they should. The new law also says that if you have an antitrust program, compliance program, you can benefit if you infringe the law, then you can have sanction reductions if you have a compliance program in place, a formal compliance program in place.
Alejandra, I'm very happy to hear that you're a bit more optimistic. I don't want to overread on your words, but it seems like the law, the act, took away some of the skepticism you had of a few months ago, although you're still not sure because you have to see who's going to be leading the competition institute or agency and so on and so forth. Is there anything in the new law that gives you a certain sense that it might be technically independent, that it might not be captured by the Secretary of the Economy under which it would be established? What's your sense on that? I mean, because all the other things seem to be positive.
Yeah, I mean, the law is very clear. It's very clear in terms of its technical independence. It says it's a technical independence body, and it will have budgetary independence. So, I mean, if you read the law, the Competition Act, then it's the way it should be. But as we all know, one thing is what the law says, and the other thing is how you enforce the law. And that does depend on the personality of those who are part of the leadership of the agency. So, as you say, I'm cautelosamente optimista, as you would say in Mexico. I'm waiting and seeing, but the scenario is much better than what happened with the other economic regulators in Mexico. And it's eventually we will look back and we should try to understand why the competition agency is standing and other agencies are not. I mean, that's like an interesting academic question.
Yeah. It's a good sign that it's standing. Now, you always, when you headed COFECE, you always felt that you didn't have all the tools at your disposal to enforce the law. I remember that you were not allowed to bring in cases, that you had to go through the Procuraduría o Fiscalía General de la República to sanction those that were breaking the competition law. Does the new law give the agency greater sanctioning powers, greater capacity to present cases, penal cases against those that infringe the law?
Yes. So what's very interesting is that if I go back to my notes and analyze the things, like the investigative tools, the amount of the sanctions, the consequences of infringing the law, that I thought the agency would need to have to be a stronger agency, they're all here. So that's why I say it's an interesting combination of things, because on the one side, it will lose independence. I mean, it will not ever investigate an abuse of dominance practice in the energy sector, for example. That's not going to happen. If you're an energy company, if you're an electricity company, if you participate in that sector, you should know by now that there's never going to be an abuse of dominance investigation in that sector. But if you participate in the rest of the economy, you should also know that the antitrust agency has stronger capacities in terms of their investigative tools, and the sanction framework is much stronger. The consequences of infringing the law are larger. As we were saying, class action damages claims and repeat offenses can have, consequences, because now the cases only need to be firm at the antitrust agency and not at the judiciary level. Mm. So it's a harsher law for sure.
Good.
I mean, what I would say is that the agency might work. It depends on their budget and how many people they bring from how many people they bring from the old agency to the new agency, and who are going to be the heads of the new antitrust agency. But I guess in general, it would be work as usual. The only difference is that there are going to be certain sectors that are relevant for the executive branch. And in those cases, they will not act if they don't have the executive government approval.
Right. I mean, the energy sector has been kept to the CFE and Pemex, and you cannot investigate those two companies because they're monopolies, and that's the way the law, the Constitution is now written. Now, in terms of what you're saying of bringing all the people and how much budget they have, under the new law, the competition agency will work with an investigative unit like you used to have, where it brings the cases to the commissioners resolve on them. That doesn't change, does it?
That doesn't change. No. You have an internal prosecutor, and he'll carry on all the investigations. And then once he issues a statement of objection, then the parties involved will have the possibility of defending themselves, and all due process mechanisms are well written within the law. And then it's the plenum who will take a final decision. And then the other thing that the antitrust agency does, which is really important, is merger review. There, what has happened is that the time frame for analyzing merger reviews have been shortened. Before, you could analyze, or the agency could analyze, a merger review for up to 100 working days, and now it will have at the most 50 days. And it's also interesting because if the federal government decides that a certain merger is of public interest or of national interest, then the agency only has 30 days to review a merger. So that, I mean, merger review will also be business as usual, although if there's a national executive branch, federal government interest, then I think we'll see a little bit of we'll see the federal government we'll see the federal government hand in those decisions. But in general, I think in general it really will be business as usual.
And in that sense, this shortened period of time, is that good, or you feel the burden will be very tight for those working at the commission?
I think the burden will be a little bit tight. So what happens with merger reviews, and this is, Damien has been in the past critical of COFECE's timing in terms of merger review, is that 95% of cases do not pose any antitrust concern. So those should go through antitrust review quickly. But then there's cases that do have potential impact on the markets in the long term in terms of market concentration and the impacts that can have on consumers. And those analyses are complicated, and you do need time. So now, when you encounter those cases, the agency will need to work faster. And I mean, really, what's difficult for an agency in merger review is exactly distinguish between those cases that are complicated and those cases that are not complicated. That's the really important decision. Once it's not complicated, you should let it go through as quick as possible.
Alejandra, I wanted to go a step back and look at the structure of the Mexican economy. And we have an economy that's very dominated by large companies like American Mobile or Kimberly-Clark or Grupo Bimbo, to probably a greater extent than other similar economies. We have a higher concentration index. We've had very few IPOs, new companies. The sort of new banks have come out of Brazil. Mercado Libre's come out of Argentina. Even in soccer, Mexico, I think, is one of the very few countries in the world that doesn't have promotion or relegation, i.e., no competition per se to stay in the league or get promoted to a higher level league. Do you think there's something in the Mexican culture and the Mexican economic structure beyond competition law that inhibits competition?
Well, Damien, what I believe is that many of these big companies have been big for a while, and it really is very, very difficult to undo market concentration. And I mean, we should all be aware even President Claudia Sheinbaum, that competition policy has its limits. Really what it tries to do is, with merger review, is stop companies from growing artificially, which means buying other companies. But in the Mexican economy, it's not bad if you grow organically. And antitrust agencies do not have the power to regulate prices or to change regulations or eliminate market barriers for other companies to come in. So when we look back at the Mexican economy and how it got very concentrated, it did get concentrated in part because mergers happened in the 70s, 80s, 90s that were not stopped, 20s, even in the 2000s, that were not stopped by the antitrust agency. And also because, and I mean, we've talked about this, regulations sometimes favor incumbents, and it's really, really difficult. I mean, you need to have really deep pockets to fight these big incumbents here and everywhere. So, I mean, if Nu has deep pockets, Mercado Libre has deep pockets. Only when those type of big pocket companies come into the market, they can disrupt it. Else, truth be said, it's very difficult. So what you have to do there is try to control their market power. And that's why it's important to have a strong antitrust agency, because there needs to be, big companies need to be afraid that if they abuse of their power, they will get sanctioned. Really, that's the way to go. That's how the antitrust system works. That is what it can do. In Mexico, you don't even have the power to sanction companies because they charge excessive prices. Initially, the Antitrust Act had included the possibility of sanctioning excessive prices. And then, while the discussion came about, they eliminated that possibility.
One element that helped, I think, your cause when you were at COFECE was the creation of specialized competition courts. They are still there. We Mexicans allegedly elected the new members of those courts. Do you know who was elected and how confident you are that these new judges on competition are competent to understand the cases, resolve them promptly, and issue the resolutions that are needed for improving competition in Mexico?
That's a very good question, Eduardo. I don't have their names on the top of my mind, but I do know their profile, and they're young judges, like many that will enter the judiciary structure, because, as you know, with a judiciary reform, before you needed to have a judicial career, and now if you comply with certain requirements like being a lawyer and other things, you could participate and you could be elected. So they're young lawyers, and also they have worked either at the judiciary in issues related to antitrust, or they've worked at IFT or COFECE doing antitrust work. So they're young, and also they're knowledgeable. So we have to wait and see. But they're not like this, like these figures, no, that have been in the judiciary forever, and that no, they're not those types of judges.
Well, I think we could continue talking about this, but we're running out of time, Alejandra. But as you said, and you offered us to be able to speak to you again when we get a better sense of who's going to be running these agencies, so we can make a better judgment and maybe probably see a few cases that they deal with to see how they are working. But it's quite interesting. Thank you very much for your time and your knowledge, and bringing some light on what we can expect in terms of competition, which is crucial for the future of the Mexican economy, without a doubt.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Eduardo and Damian, for this conversation.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining Mex Moves, and very much hope you'll tune in next week. Thank you, Eduardo.
Thank you, Damian. Thanks for listening, and we'll hope to have you back next week.